Kingdom and as close as possible relations. And whilst I'm delighted to come and do it, I'm a little bit embarrassed. Because I've got to explain to them all that actually the free trade deal with the United Kingdom could take a very, very long time after Theresa May's speech the other day. Although, if Labour were to come to power, it could take forever. Why do I say that? Well, Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, and he's just been interviewed, of course, by Ian Dale. Now, he's been speaking today in Brighton at the Labour Party conference, and he's basically saying that a new single market relationship with the EU after Brexit is what he's looking for. And the key thing is, he says, he wants whatever our relationship in the future with the EU is, and this is after, by the way, the transition period, which some in the Labour Party have been hinting could be as long as 4 years. But the long-term relationship that Sir Keir Starmer seeks is one that, and I quote, retains the benefits of the customs union and the single market. So Keir Starmer's view, as the shadow Brexit secretary, and with very little opposition in the hall today, is that these things are good for us. But of course, the point about the customs union and single market is we're not allowed to negotiate trade deals with anybody. So I don't like the position, but we had months and months. Do you remember earlier this year, I kept asking, can someone please ring up and tell me what Labour's position on Brexit is? We then thought we had clarity, when during the general election, the manifesto was pretty clear from Corbyn that if you vote Labour and they form a government, we'll be leaving the single market and taking back control of our borders. He even repeated that after the election. I would say to you that the U-turn today is pretty much complete. Not only do Labour support a transition period, in that they're in exactly the same position as Mrs May's Conservatives, but now they're talking about perhaps, a single market and a customs union relationship that could potentially go on forever. So I'm particularly asking for Labour voters, and I'm asking you, if you're a Labour voter, does this clarify the party's position? And indeed, does that please you? So please let me know what you think. 0345 6060 973. You can text at 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us live on Facebook from here in Alabama, and you can comment there too. And the first caller today is John from Henley-on-Thames. John, hello. Do you think that Keir Starmer has clarified now the Labour Party's position, and that's that?
I am very, very disappointed in both Starmer and Theresa May.
Yep.
I believe they actually both really want to stay in the EU, and they are going against the referendum result. They both really, deep down, want out.
Well, they both want in, you mean?
Yeah,
I mean, the country voted out. I mean, May is still saying we'll leave, and Keir Starmer in the interview with Ian Dale.
I don't believe May at all.
Okay.
She's said so many things and gone back on what she has said on various items. The negotiations really are at a standstill. Whatever we offer the EU, they will always want more.
Well, John, you say that. Today, they're even hinting that they might not allow us a transitional deal unless we tell them how much money we're prepared to cough up in this so-called divorce bill. So you're quite right. Those negotiations are difficult. John, I mean, are you a Conservative supporter normally?
Conservative and UKIP.
Conservative and UKIP. Okay. Okay. No, fine. So basically, John, you think the whole lot are letting us down like a cheap pair of braces, yeah?
I really, really, really do.
Well,
I really do. I am so disappointed in the way democracy has gone in this country after the referendum result.
Yeah, no, well, John, it's unfinished business as yet, but strikes me that there was a great revolution, political revolution that took place in 2016. It happened with Brexit. It indeed happened here in America with Trump. And what you've got is a major, major fight back going on from the establishment. John, I thank you for your call. By text, I get, hi, Nigel, why can't we be allowed to negotiate deals to sign just after our contract ends? I bet the EU are or will be, says Helen. Well, Helen, this legally is very tough to answer. What we cannot do, all the while we're signatories to the treaty, is sign other trade deals. But what Mr Verhofstadt, that charming former Belgian Prime Minister that I do battle with in the European Parliament, he suggested we can't even have talks with other countries about potentially future trade deals. Now, clearly, legally, that's not enforceable. So the legal position is we can't sign. What we could do, and what I hope we do, during the Article 50 period, which is what I thought the 2-year transition was supposed to be, I thought we'd be in a position where we could sign a whole host of these things as soon as we were out. But now, if we go into a transition period, and the Prime Minister said it would be 2 years, although I don't believe her, I think it'll be longer, then, we're really sending a message, Helen. We're saying to people, do you know what? Don't bother. Don't come to London. Don't see us, because we're not going to be having a trade deal with anybody for a very, very long time. And that, to me, is one of the most regrettable things that is happening. We're losing this wonderful golden opportunity to reach out to the 85% of the world that is not part of the European Union. Colin in Barnes is my next caller. Colin, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. I've listened to you many times, and I've always been a great fan. What I'd like to say is, why don't we go straight away to World Trade Organization rules? If we did that, then suddenly business would know exactly where the future lies. They can
it would certainly end. Yes, it would certainly end the uncertainty. I mean, for those that aren't familiar, Colin, with what you're talking about, that would mean a tariff regime with the European Union. Probably, I mean, some sectors would be quite seriously affected. Food potentially would be seriously affected, although, that could be negotiated. And let's not forget, they sell us a lot more wine and cheese than we sell them. And motor cars typically would attract tariffs of say up to 10%. On other manufactured goods, it would be more like 2 or 3%. So Colin, this is what's called the cliff edge, Colin. We're being told by the CBI, we're being told by the British Chambers of Commerce, we're being told by others that if we finished up in a situation on World Trade Organization lines, that would somehow be a catastrophe. But you don't seem to fear it.
Well, look, if we go WTO rules, it's been assessed that on our imports, that is the stuff they're sending to us from the EU, we get £13 billion a year. On our exports, the stuff we're sending them, we'd have to pay $5 billion a year. So if the government paid all the export tariffs to the businesses, we'd still be better off. $3 billion a year better off.
Yeah, we would be better off, Colin. Although the volume of trade may go down. Colin, you've made the case very well. I don't think there's anything to fear from World Trade Organization rules. And I think, actually, if we said to the EU, do you know what? Guys, this isn't going very well. We're going to walk, and let's go to WTO rules. I think that the German car manufacturers and the French wine producers would start screaming pretty quickly and say, can't we come to a better arrangement? Colin, I thank you. By text, I get Starmer. How do I feel? Sold out, sold out, sold out. Whatever happened to integrity and democracy, says John. Well, John, you asked that, and I'm appealing. If you voted Labour at the last election, or if you voted Labour over the course of the last few years at any point, and you were also a Brexit voter, how do you feel when the party now very clearly wants a long-term relationship with the European Union that in many ways is similar to the current benefits, I quote Sir Keir Starmer, that we currently have from the customs union and the single market? Hi, Nigel. Didn't Jeremy Corbyn say he wanted to leave the single market as he couldn't implement some of his radical left policies unless he did so? Their Brexit policy seems to be not to have one. Well, you're quite right. Jeremy Corbyn wants to nationalise everything, and the European Union, frankly, wouldn't allow them to do it. So he's in a bit of a cleft stick. But the point about Corbyn is this, folks. He became an MP back in 1983. He linked up with Tony Benn. He voted against every single European treaty that hove into view. He got the Labour manifesto launch to say all of the right things. He repeated them after the general election. And whilst Corbyn's in a very strong position in the party, and, they've got over 500,000 members, and they've got momentum behind him and everything, the one thing that he cannot control his parliamentary party when it comes to his views on unilateral nuclear disarmament and on the European Union. The Labour MPs are a massively, massively pro-EU lot. Starmer is taking us in this direction today. He's being cheered, of course, by many others in the Labour Party, and in particular Chuka Umunna, people like this that have, and I'm sure Lord Peter Hain and others are all absolutely thrilled with the direction it's going in. But I tell you what, I think it does clarify the party's position. I think Corbyn has effectively sold out. But far from this being an electoral benefit to Labour, I think it could really hurt them. I wonder what Richard in Hull makes of that. Richard, good evening.
I think it's probably one of the final nails in his coffin. Corbyn really is just turning out to be a political chameleon. It's just changing his colours to suit the audience. It's shocking.
He's also, Richard, rather changed his view on abolishing all student debt too, hasn't he?
Well, give him 5 minutes and they'll change his view on everything. But this one in particular, the Labour vote, there was a strong Labour turnout, mainly Labour actually, as you've always predicted, Labour voters that voted with him because he'd sort of fudged it at the election and he was making all the right noises, but bit by bit, I mean, I don't know if I know if anybody else does many U-turns. I don't know whether it knows whether it's coming or going.
One thing, Richard's for certain, a lot of UKIP voters voted for Corbyn in this election because they believe the assurances he'd given them on the European Union question and on the open borders question. And I think, Richard, they're going to feel very let down. Are you normally, Richard, a Labour voter?
Well, normally a Labour voter, but I'm Conservative. I did vote UKIP last time.
Right.
And I've changed a bit between Conservative and UKIP, but to be honest, I feel let down by them all.
Yeah,
I mean,
Richard,
my view is, I think Article 50, give them 50, let's be out straight away.
Yeah. Richard,
WTO rules and let's be on.
I think that view, Richard, I believe it to be held by many millions of people across the country, and it's hardly being reflected by a single one of our 651 MPs in Westminster. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Alabama, where it's 1:15 p.m, but of course that means it's 7:15 in London. So the shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, at their party conference in Brighton, lays out Labour's new position, which is that after a transition period that could last for several years, that, of course, is if that nice Mr Barnier is even prepared to grant us that, unless we promise him tens of billions. But long term, what Labour is now fighting for is a deal that retains the benefits of the customs union and the single market. Now, of course, there are many of us who think that, in fact, the customs union and the single market have over-regulated us and held us back in terms of global trade. But I'm asking you, particularly for your Labour voters, does this clarify the party's position, and how does it make you feel? And particularly, if you're one of the 3.5 to 4 million Labour voters who voted Brexit, how do you feel? At the moment, you're a little bit shy in coming forwards, and maybe you feel embarrassed that you voted Labour and that actually Jeremy Corbyn took you in and then let you down. So you could always use an assumed name, I suppose. But one little comment from the Labour Party conference today. It seems one of the biggest stories is that the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, now needs to have bodyguards to walk round the Labour conference, and particularly outside the Labour conference, where violent organisations like Antifa were out there with their flags yesterday protesting and demonstrating. All I can say, Laura, is you get used to it. I've had 4 years of it. At times it's been 24/7, so constant have the threats been, and indeed direct violence whenever they got the chance. And I think something that's been happening here, it's been going on now for some years, is a lot on the left. And I'm not specifically pointing the finger at Labour, because a lot of it will be other organisations that purport to be against racism and for love and peace, and actually they have become increasingly violent over the course of the last few years, and nobody, frankly, has held them to account on it. In my case, it was considered absolutely fair game. Oh, well, Farage thinks we should control immigration and leave the EU, so that's okay if people want to bash him up. Well, all right, you may think that. I don't. I think in a democracy, it's ridiculous that I had to reach the level of having security on that basis. But perhaps now the BBC's Paul Ed has to have security. We'll start to realise that it isn't just people on the hard right that are nasty. There are plenty on the hard left that are very nasty indeed. Andrew on Facebook asks me, Do we need a trade deal? Can't we negotiate bilateral agreements with specific companies and businesses? Right, there's a difference, folks, between trade and trade deals. You know, you can do business company to company. You know, you could be, let's say for argument's sake, you have a motor business, you're selling brand new motor cars, and you do a deal with one of the big Japanese producers. You agree to buy a car at X price from a Japanese producer, and if you've done a good deal, you might get it a bit cheaper than somebody else who's a few miles down the road. That is doing business. It's not the same as a trade deal. A trade deal sets the terms on which countries can trade with each other. So in the case of your importer of Japanese motor cars, every one of those motor cars that comes into the UK is 10% more expensive because that's the tariff that we charge on Japanese cars. Why? Because we're part of the European Union, and that's the tariff they have with Japan under WTO rules. Whereas, interestingly, Switzerland, you could buy a Japanese car and not pay a tariff. So, two things here. One is companies doing business with each other. The second is the terms of trade that countries have. And we're not allowed to have bilateral deals with any other country in the world. All of our trade deals have to be negotiated by the EU. And this is where I think Starmer is wrong when he talks about signing us up long-term to a setup that is like the customs union and the single market, because I think our future is global. But either way, I wonder what Darren and Oldham thinks. Darren, are you normally a Labour voter?
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. I voted Remain, and I also voted for my local Labour candidate. And I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that we're never really going to leave. Labour Party doesn't really know what to do. I don't think Mrs May knows what to do, so she kicks it down the road until 2021, when there probably will be a general election by then and a Labour government. So I kind of think, I'm delighted. I'm so happy. We're never going to leave, Nigel.
Are you happy, Darren? Are you happy as a Labour voter who, I hope believes in democracy? Are you happy that millions of people voted for Jeremy Corbyn, believing his manifesto when he said we would leave the European Union, we would leave the single market and take back control of our borders? And now, just a few months later, that has all been dropped. Are you happy with that?
I think Labour are playing games just like Mrs May is. I think maybe because the whole thing is such a big mess, nobody knows what to really do and how to really deal with it. I think maybe they're all frightened of dealing with it. And like I say, I don't think we're ever going to leave. We might leave in name.
But what price democracy, Darren? Europe. What price democracy? What price trust in politics? I mean, I bet living in your street in Oldham, there are people who voted Brexit and voted Corbyn and tonight are not very happy.
Maybe, but do you not think it's becoming clearer that no political party really wants to take us completely out of Europe? Do you not think it's becoming clear?
Darren, I've thought for 25 years that our political class wouldn't even give us a referendum, and it was only because they were forced into it that they did. No, I mean, I absolutely accept. I think it's becoming clear that our political classes are, frankly, the enemies of the democratic process because they're not prepared to go with that referendum result, which was the biggest exercise in democracy in the history of this country.
Well, that's how you look at it, but I look at it as one of the biggest mistakes in this country. I'm not going to go into all the arguments about the campaign. I think there was the public made a huge mistake. And remember, millions voted to stay in.
Yes, now that's
millions that voted to stay in.
Yeah, that was what Keir. Your position's very like Keir Starmer's. When Ian Dale asked him this question just sort of half an hour ago, what's your message to Labour voters who support Brexit? Oh well, what we're trying to do is to protect your jobs. Basically, you're thick.
Absolutely.
You're stupid. Right. You morons. How could you have voted to leave? No. That's the message, isn't it?
Nigel, business leaders have said it's the biggest suicide note in history. We've made a huge mistake.
And plenty of business leaders, Darren, too, are saying it's a fantastic, brave new world out there. We can open up to global markets. I mean, look, you and I could argue the Remain versus Leave case. I don't want to do that. What I'm saying to you is, surely, what Corbyn has allowed the Labour Party to do, frankly, has betrayed millions of Labour voters.
Not really, no. And do you not think Mrs May's also betrayed her voters because she's frightened of dealing with it?
Well, she has to the extent that she's kicked the can down the road. I think what Keir Starmer has done today isn't just to agree to that can being kicked down the road, but to seek a long-term relationship that, frankly, would keep us members of the European Union in all but names. I think what he's done today is even worse than Mrs May, if that's possible. Darren, I thank you for your call. I go to Blackpool next to Terry. Terry, good evening.
Hiya. You okay?
Well, I'm okay, but I mean, I'm not a Labour voter, Terry. I've never been a Labour voter. But if I was a Labour voter and a Brexit supporter, I'd be furious at the way Keir Starmer's speaking to me.
Well, I may not sound it, but I am furious. Absolutely.
You are furious, right? Okay.
I voted Labour.
Yes.
I'm a Labour man. I voted Labour. I mean real Labour, proper Labour. I don't mean Tony Blair's Labour.
Right.
So when Corbyn came up with his manifesto, which I liked, and I wanted to vote for, the fact is that I thought he was weak on Brexit, was making me, to be honest, vote for UKIP. However, when he put in his manifesto that he wanted to end free movement and what have you, that was it. Okay, that was it. That was the green light for me to vote Labour. And many like me, who I know, and he got a lot of votes on the back of that. And he knew that. That's why he put it in the manifesto, because he doesn't want... I mean, the party doesn't want to end free movement. Labour doesn't want to honour Brexit, period. That's I've always...
So what does it make you think,
Terry?
Terry?
In the manifesto, that was it.
I mean, Terry, the big selling point of Jeremy Corbyn has been, whether you agree with him or not, he's a man of integrity.
Yep.
He sticks to his principles. How does Corbyn look today with Labour now taking this position?
Completely the opposite. I was wrong. Yet again, people are going to be so disillusioned, because somebody else has let them down. Another politician has let them down. Corbyn has let them down. And he's let me down, and I won't be voting for him again, or Labour again, probably. I can't see why I would vote for Labour again. And that's a very sad day for me, and many like me. And to move it further, I mean, it's not just that as well. It's everything else. It's the coverage on TV. People are outraged. People are furious, and it's not being reflected in the media at all. I know you are.
Do you know what, Terry? It's not being reflected anywhere. And it was interesting after May's speech. Conservatives all lining up and writing in the newspapers. Isn't it wonderful? And I saw a couple of reports of people in Sunderland being interviewed, which famously voted out, and we're not bothered, a 2 or 3 year transition doesn't bother us, and it's not being reflected anywhere. And Terry, I repeat the point, there are millions of people out there like you, and I thank you for your call. Now, in a few minutes' time, I'm going to start an online auction, and that will be for somebody to bid to come and have lunch with me, and it'll be on a Friday, so I won't have to broadcast in the evening, so we might have the odd drink or two, and we'll do it for a good charity. More of that in a moment. For now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Alabama, where it's 1:30 p.m, it's 7:30 at home. So Keir Starmer makes it clear that the long-term aim of the Labour Party post-Brexit is to have a deal that retains the benefits of the customs union and the single market. And I'm asking you, does that mean their policy is now clear, and do you approve of it, particularly if you're a Labour voter who was Brexit minded? Meanwhile, that dramatic judgment last week in London, where Transport for London said that Uber was not going to have their licence renewed, and this is, of course, we're talking about 40,000 people in total that do drive on and off for Uber in London, and up to 3.5 million people who've used their services. And we've debated this on my show before, the problems with it. But interesting, on the day, Uber's response was quite angry. Over the weekend, we now have a much more thoughtful response, and Uber boss Dara Khosrowshahi, difficult to pronounce, has apologised to Londoners for mistakes we have made and acknowledged the company must change. The apology came in an open letter, and it's been sent to TfL, who of course had said that they weren't fit and proper to hold that licence. He admits in the letter, we've got things wrong. On behalf of everyone at Uber globally, I apologise for the mistakes we've made. So what he makes clear is they are sorry. They understand there have been too many reports of assaults, etc., that have not been followed up properly. He admits it, and they are going to appeal against Transport for London's judgment. And I guess you can make your minds up. Is this a sincere, genuine apology from Uber for the things that have gone wrong, or is it them getting ready for a big legal defence and making perhaps some quite radical changes, for example, in the vetting of drivers and the making sure that people speak English, all of those things, is it perhaps, a rather more cynical move in order to get them ready for their appeal against this judgment? You can make your own minds up on that. Now, on this question of is Labour's position clear, are you happy with the direction they're going in? I've got a first-time caller here. Adam in Middleton is calling me. Good evening, Adam.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. Big Brexiteer myself. One of the few young people who actually supports Brexit, it would seem, but...
Well, Adam, I tell you what, this idea that the entirety of the nation's youth are in love with the European project, I think is pretty false. And none of us know the exact numbers, but probably a third of young people did vote Brexit. I mean, what sort of age bracket, Adam, are you?
Oh, I'm 18. I wasn't actually old enough to vote in the referendum, but I voted in the general recently. But
so,
I support Brexit.
So you were too young to vote in the referendum. So can I ask? So can I ask? Did you vote Labour in the general election?
No, I voted Conservative.
You did. Okay, right.
Yeah, I live in Haywood and Middleton, which is the constituency that came very close for UKIP recently.
It came very close for UKIP. You're absolutely right. It did 600 votes away from beating Labour in a by-election a few years ago. So I mean, the Labour Party now are basically saying, look, we're going to have Brexit, but the deal we want long-term would keep us effectively part of a restructured single market and customs union. I say restructured, I mean rebadged, really. I mean, is this a kick in the teeth for Labour voters living in your hometown?
Yeah, I think so, because my own grandma, she's always been lifelong Labour. My dad votes UKIP, but he's also a Brexiteer. My nan, she voted to leave the European Union, but still voted Labour in the general election. I tried to convince her, go on, go UKIP or go Conservative if you have to. And, so I just sort of said, go for one of them. But no, she still wanted Labour, and, she's not very happy now.
I bet she's not, no. And I mean, and this does go to Corbyn's integrity a bit too, doesn't it? Because, he made this big pitch for Brexit voters to vote Labour. He also said he'd wipe away about £100 billion worth of student debt, and now appears to have backtracked on that. And Adam, just quickly, as somebody who, with his first ever vote, voted Conservative, do you feel a bit let down by Theresa May as well?
Yep, and I'll tell you what I've done right now. I've signed up for Ready for Rees-Mogg, and I've got my poster up in my window as it happens already.
So you've got a Rees-Mogg poster up in your window in Middleton.
Ready for Rees-Mogg.
Very good.
Definitely.
Very good. Adam, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Daniel says, Corbyn supports hard Brexit. Labour need to rein him in on that. Well, they've certainly reined him in. Carl says, I think Carl's right, Daniel. Carl says, Labour MPs control the party, not Corbyn. And Carl, you're right, because Corbyn has always been a hardline Brexiteer. He's always believed in unilateral nuclear disarmament, but there are two policies he cannot get through because his parliamentary party simply won't support him, so he's decided he has to go the other way. Randy thinks that Corbyn is like a faulty sat-nav. He has no idea which way he's going politically. Oh no, Randy, I think it's becoming clearer. He will go whichever way he thinks he can get most political benefit out of. Victor says, Nigel, is it now a coincidence that the next election in the UK is at the end of the transition period? Money on Labour's spend policy gets them in, and we stay in the EU. Victor, it is no coincidence at all, and it's a point, that we made after Mrs May's speech, is that, and I talked about this on my newish still Sunday show, is that this then takes us to the next general election, and there are very real risks. The very real risks that you could get a Labour government who, by the looks of it, simply would take us out in name only, if they even do that. Elizabeth is calling me from Shrewsbury. Good evening, Elizabeth.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm one of those people who voted Labour because I believed in Jeremy Corbyn, in his integrity. I do not anymore. I think Keir Starmer today was dancing on the head of a pin, and they're lying through their teeth. 17.4 million people knew exactly what they were voting for because we were told about the plague of frogs and Armageddon by all of them.
Yes.
Now, it isn't just Brexit that we have been lied to. 3.5 million women in Britain born in the 1950s were promised by most of the Labour MPs before the general election that if we voted for Labour, Jeremy Corbyn himself would ensure that 1950s British women, who some lost 6 years and £48,000 of their pension, would have parity with Polish ladies who have had their state pensions backdated.
So is he backtracking on that, Elizabeth, too?
He has backtracked on that because the Polish government has kindly said that their 1950s ladies will be given their state pensions.
I don't want to get onto that issue right now, Elizabeth, although I know it's a hugely contentious issue for a lot of women born during that period. But you voted Labour, you believed in Corbyn. Would you vote Labour again?
Absolutely not. But what I cannot understand, Nigel, is I don't agree with the way that you and your family were treated, and I can only apologise for the morons that put you and your lovely family through years of hell. I am so sorry about that.
Well, I'm just hoping, Elizabeth, that the fact that Laura Kuenssberg now needs to have protection will wake people up to just how really vile and unpleasant a lot of people on the left have become. It's not about disagreeing politically, but they have become intimidatory and violent, and that manifests itself online, of course, particularly, but also physically as well. Elizabeth, thank you for the call, and there you are. Elizabeth, we're now getting a stream of callers who voted for Corbyn, who believed in him, and who were Brexiteers, who feel badly let down. I wonder, probably in the sort of dinner party set that Keir Starmer engages in, he'll think this will do Labour electorally a lot of good. I think it could do them an awful, awful lot of harm. Andy in Bromley has a view on this. First time caller to the show. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I can honestly say I was a Labour voter. I will not be voting. I will not be voting next time round. I can honestly say I've been slightly relieved by the Conservative May approach to a longer transition, because I feel whilst I voted for Brexit, I must admit, I think in immediate days and weeks after, it was almost like going to a party and having a horrendous hangover and regretting what I'd done the week before. And it's not about leaving. It's more for me about the economic uncertainty. It's not about Brexit, and I absolutely agree, and it's everything I stand for in terms of running our own country, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But I think the government has a moral duty to ensure the economic stability of the country first and foremost. If it takes me another 2 or 3 years to leave, but we leave in a far stronger position because we've actually applied ourselves, negotiated proper agreements, etc., then absolutely I'm for it. I am not a lemming, and this country should not be a lemming.
Andy,
after 2.5 years, we've gone over the cliff with nothing secured. And it's
Andy, I understand that.
People already talking about, it's all good and great and raving the Brexit flat. That's wonderful. But I know there is many an individual, certainly in my circle, yes, we wanted Brexit, but we wanted a strategic Brexit that doesn't just cut ourselves off. And there was a great line, I thought, from one of the senior, I think it was directors of BMW. He was English, and I think he was based in Germany, who said, look, the bottom line is we sell 90 million cars worldwide. We sell 1 million to the UK. In other words, if it doesn't work out, we're not going to lose sleep over it, because quite frankly, our business is not there.
We could argue that, and look, we could all argue that, but actually, there are still hundreds of thousands of jobs in Germany directly linked to trade with the United Kingdom. Andy, I take your point that you want a responsible Brexit, but equally, if we keep on transitioning and taking longer and longer, that actually leads to more business uncertainty too. But Andy, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Right, in a minute, I'm going to tell you about this auction to have lunch with me, and hopefully a fun time. But for now, you're listening to me on LBC from here in Alabama, and it's 7:45. So we have an online auction if somebody wants to come and have lunch with me. And I've got to say thank you to Franco's Italian restaurant in central London. And you better come and join me for a private lunch. Ask me any questions you want. Hopefully have a good time. 3-course lunch. Great sommelier if you like wine at lunch. I certainly do. Now, what's it all for? Well, let me tell you. Global Radio, which is the group that wholly owns LBC, have their own charity. It's called Make Some Noise. And they support small projects across the United Kingdom, helping youngsters and their families living with illness, disability, or a lack of opportunity. And by supporting Global's Make Some Noise, you'll be helping small projects. It'll make a really big difference. So this auction prize, lunch with me, and I promise you, it'll be a Friday, right? And the reason for that is I won't be broadcasting in the evening, so we can spend some time doing it. The auction prize will be open for bids online between 7:45 p.m. today, Monday the 25th of September, and 7:45 on Thursday the 5th of October. You must be over 18 to enter, and you can go to lbc.co.uk for all the terms and conditions. So if you want to come have lunch with me, it should be fun. You can ask any question you like, and the money will go to charity and a good cause, and the lines are open. You can bid right now by going to lbc.co.uk. Now, I'm going to go to Michael in Romford. Back to the subject, Keir Starmer laying out Labour's position a very long way away from the manifesto that we saw earlier in the year. Michael from Romford, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. First of all, it's an honour to speak to you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show.
I was active in...
Go on.
I was active in the Labour Party at university, and I just feel completely betrayed, not just today, but over the past week, by a political establishment.
Yes, I mean, I think there is a broader point here, isn't there, that we've got both the parties now supporting transition. You've got the Labour Party now saying, you know, they want sort of to retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union. We've got Theresa May saying the European Union's fantastic, it's wonderful, it succeeds at everything. We've got to sign up very closely in terms of foreign aid and in terms of security and in terms of trade. Yeah, I think people do have a right to be let down. But, Michael, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, Labour have taken this position. The Liberal Democrats, of course, who the last I saw were sort of between 5 and 7% in the opinion polls, but the Liberal Democrats believing Brexit's a terrible mistake and it must be reversed. You know, is this going to benefit or hurt Labour electorally with Keir Starmer coming up with this position?
Well, to be honest, from a personal perspective, I'm over the Labour Party now. I think there are two things that frustrate me, and that is that, one, I don't believe that we should stop because of a hypothetical economic cost. The second issue I have is that the damage this will do to our national democracy for years in the future when people, 52% of people who have no reason to trust our electoral system anymore or trust democracy.
What price democracy, Michael? I asked someone that earlier. Yeah, and your second point, Michael?
That nobody, we can't trust the establishment anymore. That what is the point in a democratic process if it's not followed? If the will is
No, that's an enormously powerful point. Michael, I thank you. And I get tired of political debate that is always about the size of our GDP or money. What about trust? What about belief in democracy? What about the things that were handed down to us that we used to think had a price that was greater than money? And I think Michael in Romford is right to raise that point. Josh in Swansea has never phoned me before. Josh, you've picked up the phone. What's motivated you?
Hi, Nigel.
Good evening.
Yeah, really, I mean, just listening to what Keir Starmer said today and just basically the whole campaign throughout all of this, I think it just shows really the kind of deceit, really, that the Labour Party have been peddling. And, you know, people such as yourself have always been accused of, going with the populist vote. And it just kind of, to me, it shows, we kind of understand that, the media in this country is governed by the left, and people. It just kind of really shows that they don't really have a manifesto. They don't really have any ideas, I think, themselves, and they're just kind of going with the flow and just kind of not really backing up with anything.
Well, they're going with the flow, Josh, in the sense they're going with the establishment flow. They're going with the trendy set in North London flow. Exactly. They're going with the liberal media flow. But I'm not so sure. I mean, Swansea. You're calling from Swansea. Yep. It's traditional Labour heartland stuff, but it was big Brexit territory too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, but and that's my point. I mean, the kind of real, what people really think isn't really reflected in anything that, Keir Starmer has said today. People I meet don't really think this way at all. But like you said, it's just kind of going with the trendy London vote and the kind of trendy London ideas, and it's just not really reflected. And, hopefully I think they will lose a lot of voters.
Yeah, so you think, Josh, that they could pay a price for this, yeah?
I hope so, yeah. And I do think
terrific. No, terrific. Josh, thank you for the call. Very much indeed. Nigel, is everyone missing the elephant in the room? The EU would never allow Keir Starmer's plan to be implemented. All the benefits of a single market and the customs union while still leaving the EU. Paul, the other one, says Neil in Southend. Oh, Neil. So, if Keir Starmer's Labour is in government, and they say to the European Union, I'll tell you what, guys, we're going to pay you an absolute shed load of money. We're going to obey every one of your laws. We're going to obey all of your court judgments. We absolutely promise we won't seek any competitive advantage in any area. We won't negotiate our own trade deals or anything like that. But we won't. But we can't be members of the EU. So we'll sort of find a new name for it. Oh, and because we won't have any voting rights either. The EU would say, God, that's fantastic. We've got the Brits. They're coughing up. They're obeying everything. They can't compete with us, and they're not even going to turn up to meetings and vote against us occasionally. They would absolutely love it. That's my view. I wonder what Mike in Putney thinks. Mike, good evening.
Good evening. Pleasure to meet you. Right, I think it's absolutely crazy. I've recently been to Italy, Spain, Greece. These countries are in a total mess. I wish Jeremy Corbyn would come with me, because I'll tell you what, think again.
Yes.
Don't we, £180 billion they spend the UK? I think by 2020, in 2021, I do believe we'll be much better off.
Yes, well, I do too, Mike. I have to say, I think the biggest mistake the Leave side made in the referendum campaign is what we should have done is we should have got busloads of students into the UK from Greece to go around the universities and say, guys, you think somehow this European Union is wonderful. Just look at the way it's destroyed our country, destroyed our prospects, and I think that would have been very, very interesting. And it's a point I've made, Mike, on this programme, that both left and right across the continent, it's young voters that are doing many of these things. Mike, I thank you. And, of course, in many ways, a lot of young voters yesterday in Germany did vote AfD. And they got 12.6% of the vote and over 90 seats in Parliament. Their percentage of the vote was exactly the same percentage of the vote that UKIP got in the 2015 general election, and we got one seat, and he wasn't really one of us. So it just goes to show that in some ways, it's easier under European election systems to make a difference to the debate than it is in Britain. And my last caller on this subject tonight is Branko, who's calling from Finchley. Branko, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. So, is the Labour position now clear, and is it admirable?
It's not clear. I'm a Remainer. I was a Labour voter, but I don't even know what they're up to nowadays, so I can't really say. But there was something you said now that just caught my attention. I'd just like to touch up real quick. You said, well, the EU must be really happy because Britain's going to pay in and they're not going to be able to, make policy, and they're not even going to turn up to vote. The question is, you've always said the EU is a dictatorship, so how does Britain get to vote in a dictatorship?
Well, we get to vote, Branko, but we get outvoted. In fact, the last 50 times, we seriously tried to put down a new European proposal. We lost on 50 occasions. But the fact is, we were a pain in the neck. We were the pesky Brits, and now we are going. And if a Labour government was to sign us up to all the costs without even having a say of any kind at all, I think they'd love it. Well, all I can say as a final thought is Keir Starmer and the Parliamentary Labour Party may be very happy with their day's work today. They may well think they'll reap an enormous benefit from this. I think it could hurt them very, very badly. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Majid Nawaz. And up next, though, Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much.